Hi, thanks for joining a new video. We finally have the full review of the POCO F7 Ultra. Let's get started. This device is highly sought after because it provides flagship level specifications while being offered at a very low price point. In Mexico, it has been announced at a price of 14,499 pesos for the 256 GB edition. This is about $775. There's a 512 GB version with extra RAM costing 15,599 pesos, approximately $835. Keep in mind that prices here differ from those there. However, in the official Xiaomi store, there's already a discount, so the most basic model starts at 11,999 pesos, making it much more appealing. Even for a limited time, they are giving you a free Xiaomi monitor. And if you use the link I leave you in the description, you still have the opportunity to use the code ISA for another discount. So in total, it comes to 10,799 pesos. It's really competitive. By the way, this coupon is valid for the month of September. But hey, I already told you that it's a very attractive phone. It has many competitors in the segment, but I think it can easily beat several of them. Still, let's get to know the pros and cons below. For now, what I can tell you is that the distribution could be one of its cons, because you can only find it in online stores or in the physical Xiaomi store itself, but there are not too many in the country. Let's begin by describing the front of this device, which arrives with bezels that are quite reduced. It boasts a modern aesthetic, and indeed these bezels appear to be symmetrical. It looks fantastic, as it comes with a mica that is bonded at the factory. On the POCO Shield glass, which comes to premiere in this generation, a glass developed by this company itself to try to protect the screen well. We do not know if it will be better or worse than Gorilla Glass, but I like that they have their own implementations. Let me know in the comments if you would like us to conduct an endurance test of this model. Fortunately, to safeguard it from falls, the frames are composed of aluminum. This material provides excellent rigidity and strength. On the right side, you will notice the volume buttons as well as the power button. On the top, we find absolutely no ports or connectors, while the left profile is also maintained with a clean aesthetic, and in this case, we appreciate a thickness of 8.39 millimeters. This will not be a device that tries to be the thinnest available on the market, as that is not necessary, so we are doing well in that regard. At the bottom, we find the dual SIM card slot, and then we also come across the microphone, the USB-C port, and finally, several perforations for the main speaker. On the back, we are going to find a glass cover as well. In this case, I have the yellow edition, but it is also available in black color. The aesthetics of POCO devices have never really been their strongest point, and I don't think this one will be an exception. However, at least this time, they haven't placed the word POCO right next to the camera module, like they did with many previous models. Instead, it's a bit more subtle here. On this back cover, we can see some more polished reflective lines, which seem to be an attempt to add a bit more decoration to the back cover. The camera module comes with a golden ring surrounding it that can also get to give it a nice touch, but I think aesthetically it is still not a too attractive device. But let's say that this is relative and would be, from my point of view, of its very few weak points, since also in terms of resistance integrates IP68. So perfectly can be submerged in accidental falls and nothing will happen to him. Concerning the screen, we have a high-quality 6.67-inch panel, a common size for Xiaomi. The resolution is 1440 x 3200 pixels, which some might term KWPUHD, but don't get confused. It is a screen with a high density of 526 pixels per inch, ensuring all content looks crisp, but keep in mind this detail. The manufacturer, by using software, intentionally limits the screen resolution to Full HD. This is done to help conserve a bit more battery life. However, if you prefer, you have the option to increase the resolution settings in order to fully utilize the maximum resolution capabilities of the device. In this case, in addition to having a very detailed screen, the colors are very accurate and with very high contrast, since we are in front of an AMOLED screen. Also, in this case, it comes with many color calibrations for you to choose your favorite. The default setting is called Color Pro Original, which does not give a priority to saturate the colors too much, but if you want, you could achieve a more saturated color setting. I like that it features an option called Adaptive Colors, which automatically adjusts the white balance. Plus, it offers manual color temperature control. Excellent display, boasting a peak brightness of 3200 nits for superb visibility in bright sunlight. It's indeed a very bright screen. By using these brightness peaks, you can enjoy HDR content with your own camera captures and content from YouTube, Instagram or Netflix, thanks to Dolby Vision. It's a spectacular, competitive display, supporting both Dolby Vision and HDR+. If there's one thing to complain about this screen, it's that while the low brightness is comfy, there's no extra dimming software. It's a rare flaw, but hey, it has dark mode and reading mode with texture. So, the screen feels great in both high and low light. And to top it off, it has 120 Hz for very fluid movements. Although I must say that in some applications, for some strange reason, when scrolling the screen seems to switch to 60 Hz, that could be something that could perhaps be corrected through software, because I get the feeling that the scroll does not always look very fluid. In terms of sound, the experience will be quite intense and brutal. We have a stereo configuration with one speaker located at the bottom and another at the top. Even though the top speaker is secondary, it sounds remarkably good. The sound is perceived as surround and has a strong presence of bass frequencies. In my opinion, it might have slightly stronger mid frequencies than I'd prefer. Fortunately, there's a graphic equalizer with 10 bands allowing you to modify and adjust the sound to your liking. Completely to your liking. I turned up the bass frequencies slightly, turned down the mids and also turned up the higher frequencies, and with those settings, from my point of view, it sounded perfect. Let's listen to a small test, but remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. The device has a Dolby Atmos for sound, plus Xiaomi sound for custom headphone audio. The device can play multiple audio sources simultaneously if enabled in settings, and lets us adjust each app's volume independently, a feature not all devices have, making it a highlight. We noticed there's no headphone jack, but devices at this price point don't usually have one. For latency-free audio, you'll need USB-C headphones or an adapter. However, if high-resolution music is your priority, you can enjoy it with wireless headphones that support LHDC, aptX adaptive or LDAC codecs, as this device excellently supports them. When it comes to the microphones, we are informed officially that there are 3 of them. It is likely that 2 are located at the bottom, with 1 discreetly placed within the speaker perforations. Another microphone is cleverly concealed within the camera module, likely serving the purpose of noise cancellation. Now let's take a moment to consider how they perform, particularly during phone calls. Llamadas.
Bueno, esta es una llamada que estoy haciendo en un entorno un poco ruidoso, estoy hablando a un volumen normal. Ahora voy a hablar un poco más fuerte para ver si hay alguna diferencia, pero esto sería todo.
When it comes to making calls, I believe it performs quite well in terms of cancelling out noise perfectly, despite lacking any specific feature for this. Now, let's proceed to test how it performs in environments that are significantly noisier, especially with music playing in the background. Go. As you observed earlier, the gain has been adjusted properly, and it doesn't appear to create any distortion or anything similar, which means it performs as we would anticipate. Additionally, in this particular block, the vibration engine is positioned along the x-axis. This placement provides a premium tactile feedback experience in your hand when you interact with various elements such as the keyboard, buttons, and more. However, it's important to note that the operating system isn't fully optimized to fully leverage the potential of this engine. In terms of other bounces and similar features, it truly meets your expectations. Moreover, it offers intensity adjustments in the settings. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.0 aperture and fixed focus. In this case, to quickly open the camera, we can double press any of the volume buttons when the screen is off. The advantage is that when the screen is on, we also have a shortcut, although in this case through the power button, and it is disabled by default. Just press it twice and that's it. I love this option. The front camera is very agile, responds quickly, and has 2 amplitude levels. You can also activate beauty mode with various skin perfecting parameters. There are many options here. We also have access to different color filters to preview in real time. And in addition, we're also going to find the screen assisted flash control is available directly here. There's also another option for dynamic pictures, which will record a short video allowing us to simply relive the moment when we view our pictures right here. So it's both a photo and video simultaneously. If you prefer not to use that option, you can disable it right here. Additionally, if we swipe down from the top, we can access more options. Access the timer and time the burst to take multiple photos like a photo booth. In the settings, we see AI recommendations to toggle, mainly for the rear camera. There's a selfie settings section to rotate photos and adjust makeup effects for men, which is quite odd. It also has a mole removal option not seen on other devices. Notice that within the shutter type option, we will have the ability to tap on any area of the screen to take a picture. Additionally, there's an option to show your palm to activate the shutter, and finally, you can move the shutter to a preferred position for more comfortable use. So these are the capture tools available, and let's take a look at the result. The photography, the truth is that it does look well detailed, obviously not at flagship level, but we could say that it complies perfectly well with what one would expect from a device of this price. It is a remarkably wide camera, although having fixed focus is not recommended to be very far or very close to the camera, but at an optimal distance. To stay in focus. If you are too close, you will not be able to focus. The preview does not look well optimized. As you can see, it is overexposed, but after processing the image makes a better balance of lights and shadows, although it remains a photograph with a little lower contrast. This is where it is most noticeable that it is not a fully flagship device. At night you notice that it does a good enough job, maintaining a balance between controlling noise and maintaining the level of detail. So I believe the result is satisfactory, but in a dimmer setting, the picture might appear slightly blurred, making it a bit tricky. Little else. You need to be in an area with more lighting. In backlit situations at night, you notice that it can't balance well the area with more lighting, confirming to us that the front camera could be one of the weakest points of this cell phone. Even if you try to use the screen as a flash simulation, notice how the image drops a lot of contrast, possibly due to how the screen mica reflects the high brightness. Finally, in portrait photography, while it has a nice bokeh effect, it sometimes fails to keep everything 100% focused on flat objects, leading to odd pictures if there are extra items. If just the face is captured, it handles detail well, especially with the background bokeh effect. At the rear, we have a 50mm ultra-wide camera featuring an f2.2 aperture and fixed focus, equipped with a 32-megapixel sensor. Next, there's the 24mm main camera, which includes an f1.6 aperture, autofocus and optical stabilization, utilizing the 50-megapixel Light Fusion 800 sensor. Lastly, we have the 60mm camera with an f2.0 aperture, along with autofocus and optical stabilization using a 50-megapixel sensor. By the way, this camera on the rear has macro capabilities, which is quite impressive. You will notice that it provides an excellent response when taking numerous photos, allowing you to capture lots and lots of pictures effortlessly. In fact, there's also an action mode included, which will enable us to capture movements with enhanced definition, preventing any blurring from sweeping motions. If we hold down the shutter button, we initiate a short video recording, but if we slide the shutter towards, if you press the left or right button, you can access a burst of up to 50 photos. In our experiment attempting to capture the number 3, it's important to note that even though it appears to respond quite rapidly, in reality it actually takes a small fraction of a second to capture the final photograph. So, if you want to capture the precise moment, you definitely need to anticipate and press the button in the burst mode. Be aware that we will face an activation delay of about a quarter of a second, and the limit of 50 is somewhat short, considering that it truly takes a significant number of pictures. There's very little space between each photo, which is great for capturing the exact moment. However, I must emphasize it finishes quite quickly. On this interface, we have an exposure compensation button, which is very useful, particularly in somewhat dark scenes, to regulate the lighting. We also have the option to tap the screen in order to adjust both the exposure and focus. Actually, if we desire more manual controls, we can enter the Pro mode, where we will find the exposure compensation feature once more. Also, the shutter speed, which can reach up to 30 seconds, in this case the ISO, which can go up to 12,800, and then the white balance. Focus control, and something that you will like if you like photography is that you can save here some presets, so that with a single touch you can switch between different styles of photography, not only moving the parameters that I mentioned, but also choosing which lens to use. Here within the Pro mode, we also have access to these various color filters that we can utilize. Some of them are specially crafted in a film style manner. At the top, we can also enable photography in 50 megapixels. However, interestingly, it does not provide us with the option for photography in RAW, which would be something that I believe those who truly appreciate photography would enjoy it more. In automatic mode, we can access the same color filters and even use beauty mode with the rear camera, but only with a slider for documents. When in automatic mode, it does not detect anything. However, it provides access to documents in this mode to detect sheets and allows them to be cut. In this scenario, it provides two color modes. It's important to note that it only captures photographs and does not merge them. It does not permit the creation of a PDF with multiple pages or other functions. The QR code button only allows us to adjust the color effect as well as to adjust the cropping or remove maybe a spot or two. But in reality, the scanner is not that sophisticated. Although remember that directly in Google Drive you have a scanner that allows you to do something like that. The experience with QR codes on the main camera is good, though the QR code button isn't obvious. You'll notice that Recognize shows up in the lower left corner, but it's quite subtle, so make sure to check carefully and you can click on it to perform the QR code action. Now, let's examine the ultra-wide camera. In this instance, I observe that the capture is good, though the colors appear a bit less saturated than I personally prefer. However, in this instance, we can say that the rendering looks quite natural. It's just that most smartphones generally tend to saturate colors a bit more than this. Notice how, for example, with the main camera, it has a little more traditional saturation to what we are used to in smartphones, so you're really going to have a good quality. The main camera goes up a level. In this case, if we are going to find differences between the three cameras, note that gives us access to the focal length of 48mm, i.e. digital zoom 2x, but that looks practically optical quality. That's really great news. As long as you have plenty of light at 60mm, it will switch to a telephoto lens. The truth is, it's a slightly short telephoto in this instance, offering a total 5x optical zoom. We would have preferred a bit more optical zoom for better reach, but in this scenario, it returns to slightly more natural colors and the level of detail is clearly excellent. In this aspect, it performs quite well. However, it is important to note that it doesn't maintain consistent colors across the three cameras. Also, be cautious, because when you apply a crop on this high-resolution sensor, it allows you to reach 120mm, which equates to a 5x digital zoom. Despite this, it still maintains very good quality. I believe you might notice its digital zoom, but only if you examine it closely, because from a distance it appears to have optical quality. So the range of short and medium distance is still very good, but let's take another look at these pictures. For example, notice how the ultra-wide camera is not as sophisticated either, because it does reveal a bit of chromatic aberration at the edges and it has fixed focus. But let's move on, and here is a picture of 24 minus 48, then 60mm, and you can see for yourself how the colors can change a little more than we would have liked. At 240mm, we find what would be 10x digital zoom. I think it performs well enough. Here, you're looking at the zoom at 20x and it actually looks pretty good. Note that it tries to optimize details such as letters and figures well defined, although it does not achieve it to the 100%. Definitely, then it will not be a zoom specialist. This is a section where there is still little room for improvement, especially in this device that would be the flagship of the brand. And it allows you to go even further. For instance, you're seeing 720mm here, and it can extend to 1440, equaling 60x digital zoom. Let's examine it again. Here's the ultra-wide camera with lighter colors and the main camera with richer colors. Now, the tour. It's a 48mm, and as you get closer, you're going to notice that you're going to lose a little bit more detail. So you could say that up to 10x zoom, it would still be good quality. But beyond that, I think it's not that good. For instance, this one is 20x in 720mm. In my opinion, it demonstrates quite effectively how the device attempts to optimize details using artificial intelligence. For example, you can observe how the plants and the trunk's textures strive for optimization, yet the faces it won't manage to optimize as well, resulting in a blurrier appearance compared to the rest of the photograph. Essentially, that's the function of this device. And, well, in addition to the ultra-wide camera of the device, you could take panoramic pictures, and note that in this case, if they have a high enough resolution, although it is not a very high resolution, but it does give us access to this level of amplitude with the main camera that gives us a more accurate color. This is in case you prefer to use it instead of the ultra-wide camera in backlit scenarios. Observe how the lit area is really badly burned out in the preview when using the ultra-wide camera. I think it manages to slightly compensate for this issue, but not completely to 100%. If you notice, the ultra-wide camera appears a bit weak in handling this. In my opinion, this might be considered one of its relatively weak points. It's not something extremely serious, but if you are expecting it to deliver a photograph of the highest caliber, I believe it doesn't quite achieve that level. Using the main camera, it does improve the balance between highlights and shadows somewhat, but the image ends up having slightly less contrast than I would prefer. With the 48mm crop, it's similar. Interestingly, at 60mm, he notes the photo gains more contrast and keeps a good light-shadow balance. Even at 120mm, it performs well in backlight. I've really liked photos with this setting. At night, it does a good job. It's important to note that the ultra-wide camera manages to keep noise at bay and maintains a commendable level of detail, effectively exposing even the brightest areas. The main camera follows suit, providing us with impressive results. Even when using the 48mm crop, we can still observe a remarkable level of detail, which is not often the case with other cameras. And then switching to the 60mm camera continues this good experience, balancing the brighter areas well, controlling the noise of the darker areas well, and still trying to maintain a good level of detail. If there is no lighting in the frame, it manages noise quite well. However, the color will vary significantly from one camera to another. For macro photography, this is about as close as you can get with the main camera. It's important to note that it's still an impressively good result. If you attempt to crop within the sensor to utilize 48mm photography, you will achieve a good result. However, I want to remind you that the telephoto camera is also equipped with macro capabilities. So take a look at the impressive level of detail we can find here. It's truly remarkable in this regard. Although if you attempt to utilize the 5x zoom, you'll notice it takes longer for the shutter to operate, which increases the likelihood of the picture turning out blurry. Nonetheless, it's clear that this telemacro camera performs exceptionally well. Here, we are examining some additional examples of what it is capable of achieving. Also, the device allows high-res photos, so here's the camera result. Ultra-wide is definitely not something we recommend using in this mode. It highlights the lack of good detail level, and you'll notice a photo that's excessively grainy and of very low quality. The main camera, when used in this high-resolution mode, allows you to take slightly better advantage of the sensor compared to the ultra-wide camera. However, it still doesn't provide us with an extraordinary level of detail that one might expect. Even when using the telephoto camera, we can also utilize the high-resolution mode. I believe this is where it truly shines, as a good level of detail can be perceived even when doing some digital zoom-in on the photograph. Lastly, regarding portrait photography, I think the device performs adequately. It doesn't quite become a specialist in this area, as it lacks a bit of contrast in the image, but that overall it does a sufficiently good job. The most pleasing results will be when you use the 60mm lens, because in this sense it gives you a more professional telephoto perspective, although I would have liked to see available the 120mm setting with cropping inside the sensor. But in this case, this is the most we could use. Zoom in portrait mode. In video recording, we can achieve 4K at 24 frames per second with the main camera, thanks to the processor's capabilities. Alternatively, you can record in 4K at 60 frames per second with both the main and telephoto cameras. The ultra-wide and front cameras are more limited, offering full HD at 60 frames per second. On the video recording screen, note the presence of the compensation selector. And then, in addition, there is the light mode option, which I must emphasize once more is extremely useful. This is particularly true when you are photographing darker subjects. In those situations, the light often automatically becomes too intense, making the image appear overly artificial. However, with this feature, you have the ability to make adjustments right here. We are also going to locate a button to activate the color filters. It is important to note that in this specific case, these filters will not be compatible with recording in 4K because activating them will lower the resolution. Additionally, we have the bokeh effect enabled here. However, this effect will also not be compatible with the 4K resolution. Furthermore, we have the beauty mode, which behaves in the same manner. By sliding down the menu, we will also gain access to the super macro function as well as the stability functions. However, what I truly appreciate the most, and something that we don't typically find in other devices, is the teleprompter function. This feature is also compatible with the front camera, allowing you to place your script right here and follow along as you read. This is especially beneficial for content creators, as it proves to be quite useful when recording videos. Additionally, take note of this incredibly convenient ring, which allows you to smoothly zoom in and out. Furthermore, we are also going to come across the pause and resume button, which adds to its functionality. The recording feature is enhanced with an additional button that allows you to capture still images. Moreover, there's another button designed specifically for creating markers of significant moments. This way, when you later review your video, you can easily and quickly relive those important moments, making the experience much more efficient and enjoyable. However, please note that there isn't a button available to control the flashlight. Also, there isn't a button to rotate the front camera, which means that it does come with some limitations in terms of its functions. In this section, you are observing a result from a 4K recording. You will notice that the level of detail is clearly going to be excellent for zooming in during post-production. Nevertheless, it appears that the bitrate is somewhat low. Even in this situation with move, a very slight noise can be perceived in the background now. You have an example of a recording in 4K resolution at 60 frames per second, and it actually looks quite good. Clearly, this takes advantage of the processor's strong capabilities, given that the camera sensor itself is not particularly powerful. However, the result here is impressive and it comes out well. As I mentioned earlier, even with the telephoto camera, you can record using this exact same setting. And here you are seeing the result. Now, the most common would be to record in 4K at 30 frames per second, and that is what you are seeing. Notice that the colors are slightly more saturated than usual. It depends on your taste, but I think it doesn't maintain very natural colors. The changes in exposure are slightly noticeable. Take note that in this particular instance, it indeed permits us to switch over to the telephoto camera during recording while still maintaining the same level of quality. However, as we observed in the image, the color can vary quite noticeably between one camera and the other. Unfortunately, the ultra-wide camera is only capable of recording in full HD. This limitation suggests once more that it is a much simpler and basic camera compared to other ultra-wide options available. The rest. The recording will be somewhat basic, luckily for its processor. I believe it'll help greatly. The main camera is not very good at backlit recording, so it is important to make the most of the sensor, which as I said is not very good at backlit recording. Again, the ultra-wide camera looks very bad. It really has exaggeratedly saturated colors, a contrast that also looks exaggerated, and chromatic aberration is also noticeable. Switching to the main camera, it maintains nearly the same color rendition. However, the truth is it's not very good because it's too saturated in backlight scenarios. There don't seem to be drastic lighting changes when recording with this setup. Recording in 4K shows similar behavior, with the main camera displaying overly saturated colors. Using the telephoto camera, you'll observe that you can more distinctly notice the change in exposure when it detects or ceases to detect a face. However, it maintains very saturated colors, which wasn't entirely to my liking. At night, you can observe that this is the outcome with the ultra-wide camera. It's not too bad, especially when considering that it's not a device specialized for this purpose. In this and that, the ultra-wide camera performed quite poorly in other scenarios. Although there's noticeable noise, the curious aspect of this cell phone is that in scenes with slightly more lighting, you can detect an unpleasant noise or a lot of graininess. Therefore, the ultra-wide camera behaves somewhat strangely. In the most challenging conditions, it performed better than we anticipated, while in the simpler scenes, it performed worse than we had expected. With the main camera, it maintains more or less the same feeling here at night, with a lot of noise present, but also retaining a good level of detail, which I like. As for this balance, the brighter areas it can't expose correctly, which was expected, and in the darker areas again it notes that it controls noise well. Night recording with the main camera I'd say is good enough. If you wish to record with the telephoto camera, be aware that it will keep the brightest areas very overexposed and the darkest areas will appear quite noisy, especially when it's... I appreciate that it uses the telephoto camera at night, which is different from other devices that typically choose digital zoom. However, when you encounter a scene with significantly more darkness, you will notice it prioritizes using the digital zoom with the main camera, rather than opting for the telephoto camera. The stabilization, if it behaves quite well with the ultra-wide camera, both when walking and running, being a very wide camera, I think it compensates quite well, although I remind you that this is in full HD. Actually, at the same resolution, main camera performs quite well even when you're running, which is impressive for a main camera. Moreover, the telephoto camera while you're walking can also stabilize effectively as long as you're recording in full HD. Recording in 4K with the main camera when walking could be enough stabilization, but when running you will notice the movements much more with the telephoto. In 4K, if you're walking and trying to control your movements, well, I think it can stabilize well enough. I remind you that. Both cameras stabilize optically, but this device's shot steady mode adds more stabilization, reducing framing. Even when running, it controls movements well, aiding action scenes. It even has another mode called Shot Steady Pro, although in this case with the ultra-wide camera, but note that the stabilization is really very good and without cropping the aspect ratio so much because in this case it uses the ultra-wide camera. Regarding the zoom, note that recording with the ultra-wide camera will allow you to transition between the three lenses. It is noticeable by the level of detail in the three lenses. It tries to maintain a very similar color rendition. In this particular case, the maximum zoom capability is 15x. I appreciate that it's quite smooth and stable, although it's not the longest nor the most detailed zoom you've ever encountered. Thankfully, it's a reliable zoom, and even at 15x you can still observe a decent level of detail. When you're shooting in 4K, you won't be able to use the ultra-wide camera, which means your zoom range is somewhat more limited. The maximum zoom remains at 15x, but in this situation, for some reason, it behaves differently. It appears closer with slightly less detail, but still has good stabilization and smooth zoom. Regarding the focus, you will observe that it focuses well, albeit somewhat slowly. Fortunately, this slower reaction aids in making the focus less noticeable during subtle movements. However, for very quick movements, you will notice that the focus takes slightly longer than usual to adjust. As for the telephoto camera, the focus appears to react faster in certain environments, yet at other times it also responds slowly. I want to remind you that this telephoto camera has the capability to focus from a very close distance, which means you can create quite interesting macro videos. These are the kind of videos that even some more expensive devices don't allow you to capture. Therefore, you have a truly excellent perspective with this camera. For instance, take a look at this result with some ants. It's incredibly detailed. However, it would be advisable to use a tripod or some support because the stabilization doesn't assist much in scenes that are this close up. It's important to note that it also incorporates the portrait recording mode, although it presents colors that are more saturated than what is typically expected. Fortunately, the defocusing is executed correctly, even when it comes to the hands. If the face detection stops working, it will still maintain the applied blur effect. In this situation, it also adjusts the intensity of the blur. When you move closer or further away from the camera, the objects don't remain in focus very effectively, which could be considered a limitation. And even though it allows you to zoom in to achieve a somewhat more professional telephoto perspective, it doesn't really maintain a high level of detail. However, notice how I would use the blur effect with the telephoto lens in a way that feels slightly more natural, even though the objects should be quite far away for this natural effect to be more noticeable. Clearly, for a more pronounced out-of-focus effect, the person needs to be as close as possible to the camera, while the objects behind them should be as far away as possible. And it honestly looks quite good in that regard. To achieve this price point, I believe it can provide you with a high-quality video using this telephoto camera. Obviously, in this scenario, it isn't an artificial detection, so every object in the foreground will be sharply in focus, while those in the background will be entirely out of focus. When it comes to slow motion, we will discover a variety of settings available. You're viewing the result in Full HD at 120 frames per second. Unfortunately, the low bit rate makes it appear lower in definition than it truly is. The sole benefit is that the file is captured at a rate of 120 frames per second. This allows you, during post-production, to slow down any specific segment you desire. Furthermore, it enables us to reach up to 240 frames per second, still maintaining full HD quality. Image quality is similar, but for times you want to. If you manage to slow it down, and with the file being recorded at 240 frames per second as well, but for those special occasions when you want to. To freeze time, this device also lets us reach up to 960 frames per second, although you know that in this case, interpolated frames. So some movements could look unnatural and also does not resume at normal speed, which causes the effect looks pretty ugly. Really looks very bad when you record with this setting for fast motion. Note that the device behaves. In fact, it's excellent for capturing people's movements because its basic setting is 4x. Also note that if it's stabilized and in 4K, you get a great level of detail. On the other hand, for recording landscapes, it can reach up to 1800x, providing excellent perspective. And in scenarios like these where extremely rapid movements are perceived, it performs excellently in fast motion situations. The front camera will record with a really very low quality. Already from the picture we anticipated that it would have a simple quality, but here in the video we realize that it is really lousy. Perhaps also the mica comes to project light in a very ugly way, I do not know, but it loses too much against. The image, it looks very poor quality. Completely burned in backlit areas, so it is not recommended to record with this camera. By the way, the previous video was recorded at 60 frames per second, so watch now how it would look at 30 frames per second. I think it keeps practically the same experience. We see a good stabilization that would be the little redeemable of this front camera, because the rest, the truth is that if it behaves very badly, especially I insist in backlit condition. At night it will try to eliminate noise, and I think that curiously at night it behaves better than in the daytime. When backlit. At night, because our lighting is somewhat dimmer, I believe it manages to control itself more effectively. It attempts to reduce noise and also remove some detail, yet it doesn't appear as disastrous here as it did during the daytime. It's worth noting that it includes fast motion with the 4x setting, which is quite useful for recording while moving around. Additionally, it offers slow motion at 120 frames per second, although only for a few scenes, and it's in very basic HD quality. Please note that it also features a dual camera mode for video recording. Interestingly, it appears to apply a beauty effect on the front camera that cannot be disabled, which looks somewhat strange, but that's alright. The benefit is that it allows you to switch between picture-in-picture and split-screen modes. Additionally, it lets you reposition the floating rectangle, and it will keep autofocus enabled, allowing you to adjust your framing as needed. You can even zoom in and out. So the behavior is really very good, although the result I did not like so much, especially because of the exaggerated beauty applied to the face. And finally, it also has the portrait recording mode that blurs the background. And it does it actually better to record in this mode as it makes the video appear more professional, allowing us to overlook the general lack of contrast. When recording videos with this camera, it doesn't focus objects well, but if you hold them, it detects them with intelligent behavior that helps. I'd use this mode to enhance video quality. When it comes to the software, this device provides us with Android 15 along with HyperOS 2. It promises 4 years of software updates and 6 years of security patches, ensuring a long and very good lifespan. This will certainly be a positive experience. As for software options, you are already aware that Xiaomi is among the manufacturers that provide a broad range of customization options. We have access to a theme store that doesn't just alter the icons and background. It can also entirely transform the aesthetics of both the lock screen and the home screen to create extreme customization. In this way, it stands out among manufacturers. You can have a unique look with the theme store. For always on display, it performs well, offering various covers to choose from. By default, it shows 10 seconds after screen touch. Then, what happens next is that you'll notice the screen will actually turn off. This is the standard behavior set by default. Luckily, if you prefer, you can adjust this in the settings. If you'd like the screen to always remain on, you can definitely make that change, even though it will clearly use a bit more battery power. However, it's convenient to have this option available. Moreover, you even have the capability to choose a smart setting or a program setting which can be activated only during specific times or a schedule. Note that you can't have an always-on full-screen display for pictures, only small covers, but it's nice to have this option. There are gestures too, like sliding 3 fingers down for screenshots. And remember, you can take scrolling screenshots to capture more content than usual. The screen. You can later edit it to censor content with one tap. For a precise screenshot, hold 3 fingers on it and choose a tool for specific snippets. You can also double tap the power button to turn on the flashlight, but it replaces the camera gesture. And it also has a back touch option that would allow us to enable some option with 2 or 3 taps on the back scale of the phone. Some options seem to be optimized for China, like Alipay and WeChat, but we also have some other tools, like for example, take a screenshot and note that I'm going to give you 2 taps on the back of the cell phone and that's it. It works pretty well. I believe it's quite a useful shortcut. However, it could be significantly improved if it let us open any application we desire. Unfortunately, in this scenario, you are restricted to the choices the device provides. The one-handed mode is quite poor. It merely shifts to the lower half of the screen. Additionally, over in the sidebar, we'll gain access to several apps that we can launch in a floating mode. Here, it allows 2 apps open simultaneously in this format. Interestingly, YouTube isn't available in this format. However, with split screen, we can have up to 4 apps open. We can also switch these apps to split screen mode and keep them in the recent apps list. However, this sidebar is not just useful for opening applications in this mode alone. It can additionally be utilized to open applications in a split screen mode as well. Also have other tools, though settings are somewhat hidden, but here we can have... Having access to these video apps will provide us with a wider range of options. For instance, when we are using TikTok, we might see various tools available to us, such as those for recording the screen or taking screenshots, project wirelessly, or even activate the AI captioning feature. This way, even if the video doesn't officially include subtitles, here you can read what they say on the video, as long as you, when configuring... If we speak about language, then furthermore, we are going to discover a style changer. Color of the screen, also Dolby Atmos and configure how we want the sound to behave. And finally, there is this option that gives us some visual effects a little more fluid, useful for videos of a lot of action that in some screens could be perceived strange. Here, you could perfect it. Also, for video calls, we could have access to a beauty mode, for example. When you are on a video call, this sidebar will also show you an option. The sidebar offers face brightening through screen brightness and a noise reduction option. Even the artificial intelligence functions of interpreting or subtitles are through this sidebar. And lastly, we have the function that recognizes hand gestures to create various effects. For instance, as you can see here, it makes confetti appear, which is really a nice way to enhance your video calls and make them more engaging. Additionally, we have an option that attempts to monitor your heart rate. However, this is done through the flash and the camera, and honestly, the accuracy isn't quite there yet. So, unfortunately, it won't be able to provide a reliable reading at this time. It's important to note that the main camera is entirely separated from the flash. In the past, having the flash close to the camera served a purpose, as it has in this animation. However, now that they are completely separated, the truth is that trying to monitor this way does not make much sense because it won't yield a good result. In previous days, small devices have accomplished this through the fingerprint reader. However, in this particular case, I truly think the accuracy will be quite low. It additionally offers another feature known as active visual perception. This feature ensures that the screen remains on whenever it senses that you are looking at it. However, it's important to note that this will naturally lead to slightly higher battery consumption. These are more or less the new options added, or those that serve to somewhat differentiate this device from others. Regarding artificial intelligence, I have already created a video covering the entire suite of Xiaomi Hyper AI, allowing you to become familiar with it with greater precision. In the description, you will find a video where I explain and describe each of these functions one by one, as they truly include a lot of added features. What should be mentioned here is that this generation has slightly enhanced the aspect of writing with AI. Now, in any text field where you wish to write something, you can select it and then the hyper button will appear. You will have the ability to transform anything you have written or even receive some guidance to help you write another document entirely. This would be added because now you can have it in any text field, that the behavior is basically the same as I already told you in that other video. Now it also adds a new feature to animate the photos of your wallpapers with artificial intelligence, and in the gallery editor you will also notice that it adds an option that I had not told you in that video, which is enhance, which will try to give a little more definition to the photos. The other functions I mentioned to you, like expand the object eraser and others, but note that in this case it even marked error. It says that the server is busy. It seems that this kind of AI functions by relying on the cloud, would sometimes work and sometimes not. It's not as advanced as AI in other devices that run options directly, though this device's processor is powerful enough to handle many tasks. Directly here, however, Xiaomi opts to utilize artificial intelligence services from the cloud. Notice that this process might take quite a bit of time, so we're waiting and presto, it's finally here. However, I must say there wasn't a significant difference in this enhanced feature. I insist the rest of the features have already been shown in the other videos, so if you want to get to know them, I highly recommend you go watch that content. When it comes to security, this device truly excels, particularly because it integrates an ultrasonic fingerprint reader, which is quite uncommon in this range, and in a way it justifies the Ultra surname. The advantage of having an ultrasonic fingerprint reader is that it does not emit any light, meaning it won't be bothersome at night. Additionally, it is significantly faster and can even recognize your fingerprint if it's slightly wet. It can support up to 5 records. Since it's integrated into the screen, it provides support to change the animation during recognition. Additionally, it offers shortcuts, allowing you to unlock the screen and slide your finger to one of these icons quickly. Moreover, it includes an unlocking facilitator, basic and Bluetooth smart unlock, so when connected to Xiaomi accessories, the phone remains unlocked. However, it lacks Google Smart Lock, which is more advanced. What this feature does is integrate a secure folder that is cleverly hidden within the file manager, allowing you to store private content safely. Additionally, it includes the second space feature, which essentially lets you have 2 separate phones in one device. This means that even from the lock screen, you can set a distinct pattern to activate each phone space individually. A cell phone and another pattern to activate another cell phone. It also gives you the application lock, so you can choose which applications must request a second verification before allowing access, as well as the option to hide applications, and also gives you the option to clone some applications to use 2 accounts on the same phone. What it integrates is a child mode, which I believe is quite necessary. Additionally, we will also find a malware scanner included. However, in this case, it is developed solely by Xiaomi without collaboration with a more advanced cybersecurity company. Therefore, I think it will offer only basic protection. This is in addition to all the features that Google has added for the rest of the Android devices. I will explain those features in more detail in a separate video, which I have linked in the description for you to check out. We found the battery capacity to be 5300 mAh, which theoretically seems slightly above average. However, when we tried downloading as quickly as possible, the phone only lasted for 3 hours and 28 minutes, which is nearly an hour less than our expectation for devices with 5000 mAh batteries. This indicates that it discharges quite rapidly, mainly because the processor is extremely powerful. Therefore, during highly demanding tasks, the battery will deplete very quickly. Fortunately, the device does control well the energy being consumed by the applications running in the background, as in this kind of tests it went up to 8 hours with 12 minutes, showing a good optimization, and finally playing YouTube videos with the screen brightness at 50% it reached 16 hours with, 56 minutes, nearly 17 hours, which I believe is slightly less than expected. There are certain devices available that provide more appealing battery options. As a result, some users might find it necessary to utilize the standard saver mode that is integrated into the device. In addition, they may also need to make use of the included 120-watt charger to ensure optimal performance of the Ultra Save mode available on the device for emergency occasions. When the battery dies, it will be appealing to use the 120 watts charger included in the box, which is a definite advantage. And in the test, within 15 minutes, it rose to 46%. So early on, as you see in the graph, it charges at high power. In 30 minutes, it reached 78% battery, and a full charge completed in 41 minutes. Interestingly, within the settings, we discover a maximum speed charging mode. When we activate this mode, the result is practically the same as without it, so there doesn't seem to be a noticeable change whether you turn this option on or off. It's important to mention that this device also supports wireless charging of up to 50 watts. However, the charger is sold separately, and it must be Xiaomi's own charger to fully utilize this maximum power capacity. Interestingly, this device not only meets expectations with its Ultra designation, but it also includes the feature of reverse wireless charging, which is quite impressive. This addition truly fulfills the expectations one might have for a device with such a prestigious surname, Ultra. Finally, to maintain the battery, use smart charging and charge lock, useful daily tools.
Yeah.
Connectivity offers benefits like supporting 5G and Wi-Fi 7 for fast downloads. Software allows blocking mobile data for chosen apps, leaving Wi-Fi only. It includes Bluetooth 6 for stable connections and NFC for mobile payments, but no FM radio. Interestingly, it does have OTG capability, allowing you to connect various accessories to the USB-C port. However, it's curious that you can't use an HDMI adapter to project the screen with a cable connection. But it does not have MHL. Something I think you do miss in a device that wants to be Ultra. Therefore, the screen projection must necessarily be wireless, and in this case it can do so in both mirrored mode and in a slightly more advanced mode that would allow you to project with the window minimized so you can continue using the cell phone while projecting something else, or project with the cell phone screen off to not consume so much battery, and even hide notifications in the projection. The device additionally provides access to Android Auto for every user, both wired and wirelessly. Regarding sensors, it includes an accelerometer, a geomagnetic field sensor, an orientation sensor, and a gyroscope. Fortunately, the proximity sensor is physical and even features infrared, enabling you to utilize this device as a universal remote control by configuring it through its own My Remote application. As for the ecosystem, you know that Xiaomi is a brand that has too many products. So you have the Xiaomi Pad, Smart Band, Smartwatch, Xiaomi Buds, and many, many more, with its sub-brands Redmi and Little. Then the catalog of devices is actually quite extensive. Recently, Xiaomi has significantly improved the way these devices interact with various interconnectivity technologies. For instance, they now offer features like a shared clipboard, or connect multiple cameras to a tablet for multi-camera recording and more functions. Thus, Xiaomi stands out, especially with numerous accessories for a smart home via the Xiaomi app. Although in this case, most of them must be of the same brand or brands incubated by Xiaomi so that they can work well. That is, it is not yet compatible with the Matter standard or more advanced things to connect products from other brands to its own application, so you could still depend on Google Home in some aspects. For interaction with laptops, this device has the Windows Link function already pre-installed so that the configuration is not so complex and you can enjoy some tools. There is more advanced interaction between the cell phone and the computer. Xiaomi does offer some laptops, but they are only available in China and a few other regions, which means there is still a noticeable gap in their ecosystem in those areas. The brand does not rely heavily on Google, however. The cloud storage is a collaboration with Google. Therefore, the gallery is integrated with Google Photos since Xiaomi Cloud is limited to China. For app installation, there's Google Play and also Xiaomi's App Mall as an alternative. It's not heavily dependent on Google. Let's test app opening times. The POCO F7 Ultra has a Snapdragon 8 Elite processor, 12GB LPDDR4X RAM, and 256GB UFS 4.1 storage, with more RAM and storage options available. It took 1.75 seconds to open each app, on average. It certainly possesses a tremendous amount of power, comparable to that of a flagship device. Now let's attempt to switch among various applications to determine whether they continue to operate. Keep in mind that with its 12GB of RAM, we should not experience any reboots, and so far that is exactly what we are observing. However, let's keep moving forward with this transition to determine if it is truly effective. It appears that yes, the performance will indeed be one of the most appealing aspects of this device. You definitely won't be needing to restart apps, as the transition between each one is going to be quite seamless, and without a doubt, and even while browsing apps, we'll have a great experience, no worries. Take note, for instance, of how the processor is exceptionally powerful when it comes to handling these kinds of applications, which demand extremely rapid real-time processing capabilities. In reality, it faces no issues whatsoever in managing this type of application. The filter performance and GPU power are truly impressive. Now, let's check its behavior in more traditional applications like Facebook. Notice how smoothly we can scroll without issues. The device loads content very quickly and never freezes. Let's quickly change applications so you can see the performance we achieved. Check if it's still running smoothly. As I mentioned, In the display section, sometimes the screen appears to switch to 60 Hz, making movements seem less fluid. I didn't like that, but overall the performance is very good, as you can see. The RAM includes an extra virtual 4 GB we can change or disable. Xiaomi also adds 8 GB more storage, so we have an eSPAC of over 256 GB. The system uses only 11.36 GB, which is quite good. The space is interesting, especially with the 512 GB option available. Have you ever noticed how we have advanced deep cleaning tools designed specifically to analyze all the contents of your phone? These tools help you free up space more easily. For instance, they categorize videos, apps, and various other things that are consuming space. They also include a cleaner for WhatsApp and Facebook. However, they don't provide image or video compressor tools, which could be quite useful as well. And now let's see if the UFS 4.1 storage really gets to take advantage of it. Okay, we're running this speed test and look at the results. In read speed, we already have 36,257 megabytes per second. In write speed, 31,077 megabytes per second. So it really is a very fast-going device. And now let's go to a real-life test, interestingly. This gesture to remove the zoom in this editor functions quite poorly on this cell phone, unlike all the other cell phones that I have tested. But, well, that could be a drawback of the application, or I don't know. Here we have the video ready. Let's export it, as you know, in this case in 4K. And I remind you that in this case we are using clips recorded with this cell phone in 4K. Initially, they will give us a total of 1 minute and it took 17 seconds. This device responds quickly, especially in tasks involving the CPU, GPU, RAM, and even internal storage. When it comes to games, we will discover Game Turbo. Interestingly, the shortcut for this feature must be set up through the security application, which is quite unusual and something Xiaomi has yet to address. However, within Game Turbo, we can see all the games we have installed, allowing us to manage them effectively. It's important to note that there's a system status bar here, and through this, we can also adjust the GPU's behavior to either maximize power consumption or opt for a more conservative approach. Additionally, we are going to discover a bit of configuration here that lets us turn on and off some extra tools, although it's nothing too complex. Let's jump into a game so you can observe how a little sidebar shows up here. Where if we're going to have a little more input tools, you see the frames per second. Additionally, there is a button here that lets us choose whether to prioritize the image quality or to give priority to the frame rate per second. In this regard, it offers numerous options due to its integrated chipset. This is not only because it features the Snapdragon 8 Elite, but it also includes another chip developed by Little. I'll provide more details on this later. Importantly, this combination allows for optimizing image resolution and achieving an even higher frame rate, which is quite remarkable. In this particular case, we decided to keep these options disabled during our gameplays. The reason is that they are likely to use up a bit more battery power. However, it's important to note that these options are indeed available if needed. In this section, we can also clean the RAM memory, which helps to give more priority to our game. Then, we have a mode to prevent interruptions with the Do Not Disturb feature. Additionally, there are options for taking screenshots and making screen recordings to wirelessly project the screen. We can also optimize Wi-Fi connectivity to improve latency. Furthermore, we can directly adjust the brightness and modify the notification style. By default, the notifications appear in a bubble format that you can slide down to quickly access WhatsApp. However, by activating the specific option, the notifications will not overly disrupt your experience while you are playing games. As you can see, it will appear as a small strip that runs along the screen in a very subtle and unobtrusive manner. Additionally, it includes an option to modify your voice. It's useful in chats where you need to use a mic but don't want your real voice heard. And finally, there are the timers that you have available for other types of content. The truth is, in that regard, it doesn't quite stand out as much as Red Magic, which can really shine by offering you endless options. I believe that in this area, there is still some work to be done to enhance the experience. While the performance might be outstanding, the overall experience for gamers could potentially fall short when compared to other available options. In Call of Duty, this device provides the graphics quality. By default, we have a very high maximum frame rate. As you can see, we can even increase the graphic quality to the highest level. However, if we switch to the Ultra rate, the graphic quality drops to a medium level. This is the same behavior we see in the top and most expensive flagship models on the market. So, having this performance at this price point is impressive and a major selling point. It must be said that in this case the device by default records at 24 frames per second, but fortunately if you can change it in the settings, so we raised it up to 60. It's notable that it can record up to 90 frames per second, which is great, even reaching 50 megabits per second. The default setting is 16 megabits per second, and we keep it there. With all this clarified, remember that the device's performance is actually extremely high. We will discover 60 frames per second on average, very high stability with very good graphics compatibility, and I insist the screen recording also accompanies the good experience, so this device is a very good choice. It is even recommended for those who want to record gameplays, not only for traditional gaming. Here we find an incredibly attractive experience for gamers. The visual effects are excellent, though they vary by game, but the processor supports all the latest advanced game effects. In our initial test, the temperature was well managed. We prioritized the refresh rate, achieving the ultra rate, and in this case the expected range is typically you see 90 frames per second. However, in this particular instance I achieved up to 120 frames per second. This results in extremely high fluidity, and it's important to mention that the performance remains consistent even in slightly longer gaming sessions. The temperature it controls perfectly well with 46 degrees Celsius. In this test you have to remember that this device has a special chipset called Vision Boost D, which is the first dedicated graphics acceleration chipset in small devices. It is built using a 12-nanometer process, and its main focus is to enhance the graphics experience in games, as well as improve the frame rate per second. With frame interpolation, it can potentially provide up to 120 frames per second in some content that isn't usually available. Additionally, it offers a more detailed image, better visual effects, HDR, and more features. Next, we proceed to play Correct Street and observe that we adjust the default graphics quality to the highest possible setting. Keep in mind that this particular setting would typically be required in the most expensive devices available on the market, which can cost over 30,000 Mexican pesos. Thus, it is important to note that in this scenario, once more, the experience has truly been remarkable. The experience was very good. 60 frames per second, although when recording the screen, if you get to perceive some cuts or hitches a little more marked. But do not leave completely frozen the phone or anything like that. And note how the temperature is still well enough controlled with 41.9 degrees Celsius. Given the game's difficulty, this is an excellent device. It also includes a cooling system called Dual Channel Ice Loop D with 5,400 square millimeters of surface area to cool the processor. We played Genshin Impact, which defaults to high quality, but for testing, we set it to very high quality at 60 frames per second, increasing the mobile's blurring. Extremely high, meaning we are choosing the graphic quality of devices that are significantly more expensive than this phone, and once again the experience has been excellent. On average it maintained 60 frames per second, with the temperature rising slightly higher to 42.9 degrees Celsius, yet it was still able to sustain. I have to say, despite all the games we have already played and the heat that has been generated, the device still maintains a very good performance with a low peak of just 55 frames per second. Therefore, the experience when playing games with this device will certainly be one of the most appealing aspects. Anyway, we had already observed that it has numerous other attractive features, but I believe that clearly the gaming performance will stand out as the most appealing for the majority of users who are interested in this cell phone. We played Sendless Sun Zero with default high quality and left it there, but also increased rendering quality. We then turned it up as high as possible. Note that if it has a smoothing mechanism, we enabled the highest quality of shadows. In general, we turned everything up as high as possible, even to 60 frames per second. And let's see how it did again. Note the performance is brutal. In this case, 59 frames per second on average, but the lowest peak was just 52. So for gamers, this option will definitely stand out as one of the most appealing and attractive alternatives available. Of course, there's also Red Magic, which is priced very similarly and I believe would serve as the direct competitor. I'm not sure about this device. However, here we will probably find a camera a little more attractive than the one we found in Red Magic, so I think it has good arguments to compete against that device. In terms of performance, we will truly encounter a very intense experience. However, unlike the Red Magic, this one lacks a fan. As a result, during this game the temperature increased to 43 degrees Celsius, especially since we had been playing previous games too. Then we moved to Guttering Waves, our game. These are the most demanding games available today. By default, they run on balanced settings, but we've customized them to push the limits, achieving 60 frames per second with the highest quality settings and numerous effects enabled. We've truly put them to the test, tackling the most complex challenges in the entire industry. In this particular case, without a doubt. At this price, few options will truly deliver this level of performance. An average of 60 frames per second with 56% as the lowest peak. This device excels in demanding tasks, offering attractive graphics and advanced visual effects, and it can undoubtedly run sophisticated games. This is one of the rare games that places significant demands on this processor, and it becomes evident in the temperature as it reached 45.4 degrees Celsius. Therefore, only in this kind of mobile game, which is ultra complex with graphics set at the maximum level, can it slightly challenge this device. Even though it heated up, it actually maintained a very good performance overall. The main point here is just how uncomfortable it might get to hold a device for a prolonged period with this temperature, but that the experience really is brutal. Finally, we play Bright Memory. Note that in this case, we have set it to 120 frames per second, enabling all possible effects at the highest. And we must say that in this case, did not reach 120 frames per second, unlike what we have seen in the Galaxy S25 Ultra, which seems to me that so far is the only device that has reached that number. But this gives you an idea of what devices can get to compete with this little cell phone in terms of performance. This device is much cheaper and gives us a really good experience. Excellent at gaming. Temperature is another factor we could question. Particularly for demanding gamers playing for hours at high settings, they might face some issues, especially when holding the device. But even with the heat, the device still performs very well. The graph shows a slightly lower peak near the end, which corresponds to a screen displaying special game instructions, making it a very low peak. We definitely wouldn't count it out. The experience, I must emphasize, is absolutely brutal for this price point, as it provides access to graphics that other devices simply cannot offer, all while maintaining an impressively high performance level. Let me remind you that this device includes a temperature control system, thanks to the inclusion of 15 sensors. So even if it heats up, the device will not actually suffer any damage. In summary, it will certainly be among the most competitive devices in its price category, since we'll find featuring an excellent design regarding resistance and possibly also in terms of aesthetics. A concept is somewhat subjective, but I still don't really like excessive aesthetics. However, in terms of resistance, it's excellent. It has an exceptionally good screen and the sound quality is also very impressive. The front camera might be a bit disappointing if you're seeking a well-balanced phone. It's evident that they've cut costs on the front camera and even the ultra-wide camera on the back, which still offers quite good quality. A basic quality. Video recording won't stand out either, just as you see with many camera aspects. It becomes old. But the battery experience, I think, is fine without being outstanding. The charging power is very good. The software experience, it is to the Xiaomi, i.e. many options, some redundancies, and many ads out there hidden. But it is what we are used to in a Xiaomi. Here the advantage is that it offers good security options, and ultrasonic fingerprint reader unusual in the category, but the standout feature is the Snapdragon 8 Elite's performance, a processor found in much pricier devices. This phone would be fast, agile, and excellent for gaming. Although discussing this last topic, when it comes to competing in price with Red Magic, I think it might lack in added software features since Red Magic offers more in that area. However, even if this isn't a perfectly balanced phone, I believe it is slightly more balanced than Red Magic, which focuses entirely on gaming. In this case, it seems to consider other details a bit more. We've reached the end of this review.